Good afternoon, members of the press corps, guests and friends who are joining us via live stream. Durud bar shoma va khosh amadin. We had a beautiful moment just before starting this press conference of a wonderful rainbow that lit up the sky. So we remember the spirit of 10-year-old Kian Pir Falak, who was shot indiscriminately by regime forces. And he always referred to God as God of the rainbows. So we feel his presence and very blessed to have you all here together. Before I formally begin, I have some good news and bad news. The good news is, did you know that Iranian women have won the prestigious Sakharov Prize and Nobel Peace Prize? Both celebrated just this week. The bad news is that the regime of the Islamic Republic banned the recipients and their families from traveling to receive their prize, while their officials travel and walk freely here in Geneva at the 2023 World Forum of Refugees. And the worst news, more tragic, is the fact that 19-year-old child bride Samira Sabzian is at imminent risk of execution by the regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. She was supposed to be executed early this morning, but because of international pressure, they have not executed her today, but tomorrow is a different day. My name is Nazanin Afshin-Jam. I'm a human rights activist, and I will be chairing this press conference today. I'm here with a select group of experts, advocates, and victims of the brutal regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are all from different backgrounds and political affiliations, but we are united in our disdain for the regime and carry real hope and dream for a free, democratic Iran. We, sitting here, are just a small representation of a grassroots coalition of over 70 Iranian diaspora groups and network of hundreds of independent Iranian activists. And we can confidently express that we also reflect the voices of a vast majority of Iranians in Iran when we say we are appalled by the presence of the regime delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran here in Geneva. We believe, given their atrocious human rights record and their contribution to the refugee problem, it is astounding that they would be given the audacity, they would have the audacity to participate in the Global Refugee Forum. It is true that once upon a time, Iran was a bastion of inclusion and diversity. Some 2,500 years ago, the founding father of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, stood for values well before his time when he exhibited not only tolerance, but compassion for exiled groups. There was a time when Iran was graciously receiving refugees. However, in the past 44 years, since the Islamic Revolution, we have seen nothing but brutality, intolerance, injustice, and a prejudice system for refugees seeking refuge in Iran, namely the Afghan people. Our panel of experts and victims of this regime will attest to the fact that inside Iran's borders, the regime treats Afghan refugees as third-class citizens. Their movement is heavily restricted and health considerations negligent or non-existent. This includes beatings, detention in unsanitary and inhumane conditions, coerced payments, and deportation without due process. Why third-class citizen? Because this brutal regime treats its own citizens as second-class citizens, especially its women living under a gender apartheid system. The Islamic Republic of Iran has an appalling record of human rights abuses, including executing children, persecuting ethnic, religious, and gender minorities who are fleeing out of the country in droves as refugees, causing Iran to be ranked highest in brain drain among developing countries, according to the International Monetary Fund. And according to UNHCR, the number of new asylum applications made globally by Iranians in 2022 rose 44% compared to the previous year. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the leading state sponsor of terror, funding proxy terrorist groups to instigate wars and instability, causing an exodus of migrants in neighboring countries, including here in Europe, causing major economic and security problems inside its borders. And this regime dares attend the World Forum on Refugees, and some of our world leaders of free societies dare to shake their hands, engage in hostage diplomacy, make prisoner deals, and create a precedent for the cycle to continue where the regime detains innocent foreign nationals to be used as pawns. In short, the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran should not be welcomed here in Switzerland or the United Nations. They have nothing to contribute in the area of refugee issues other than being one of the biggest enablers of the refugee crisis in the world. We have a message to our own representatives from Canada, the United States, Germany, Switzerland, and the other countries that the world is represented by this coalition. Think twice before extending your hand, shaking hands with a regime with so much blood on its hands. Let us not forget that this year alone, they killed over 600 peaceful protesters, including 71 children, arbitrarily arrested and imprisoned over 20,000 peaceful protesters, and tortured, raped, and blinded hundreds of others. The male representatives of the free world should actually think more than twice. I say this because the regime officials refuse to shake hands of their female colleagues and counterparts. At the very least, show some solidarity with female diplomats who are ignored and discriminated against by the officials of the regime. Cultural relativism has no place when it comes to the abuse of human rights and dignity. Think twice before you meet and lend legitimacy to a tyranny that morally and politically does not represent its almost 90 million population and almost 10 million people in the diaspora. By legitimizing a tyranny, you consequently delegitimize liberty. Think twice before adding another indelible stain on the institution of the United Nations. Remember, this regime misuses UN global forums to delegitimize human rights values and erode public trust in the United Nations. Look at their track record. The regime manipulates every UN forum to amplify misinformation and fallacies that divert attention from the United Nations' focus on human rights and violations in Iran. We here reflect the face of Iran and freedom-loving Iranians, the ones who believe and fight for the revolutionary cry, woman, life, freedom. We stand for the aspiration of the Iranian people for human rights, freedom, and welcoming treatment for its most vulnerable groups and individuals, including refugees. The Death Committee president of the Islamic Republic canceled his trip last minute yesterday due to the danger of being arrested and prosecuted for crimes against humanity. Half our battle has already been won. However, his foreign minister, Minister of Interior, and other tyrannical officials are present. So are we. To refute their public diplomacy effort by shifting away the attention to the status of the people of Iran and their cry for freedom. You see, the world recognizes their nefarious nature, and those who commit human rights violations at the IRGC are acting as a terrorist entity. Many Western countries have sanctioned individuals. They can't come and go as freely as they used to. So they use platforms like the United Nations, where they have diplomatic immunity, to show that it is business as usual. They take the opportunity to have bilateral meetings and shake hands and take smiling pictures with other politicians. Do not be fooled by their attempt to manipulate public opinion and propagate their narrative. What was the result of 18 months of nuclear negotiations with them? Nothing but fallacies. What was the result of their commitment on the improvement of the rule of law? Nothing but repression and anarchy. What was the result of any agreement with them on the improvement of good governance? Nothing but mis- and disinformation. That is why we are here, to counter their false narrative. If you believe in fundamental human rights and do not just say you do out of habit or platitude, then we plead with you. Do not shake the blood-soaked hands of this regime. If you do shake their hands, you may as well be kicking the stool right under the next one in line to be executed. Stand on the right side of history and stand with us. I would now like to turn the microphone to Mariam Bani Hashemi, my core organizer. Without her, none of this would have happened. She lived in Iran for 3 decades and is a first account witness to the way the regime misuses institutions and manipulates to their own advantage. She is no stranger to the press corps here in Switzerland. I would love for you to have the floor now, Mariam.
Thank you, Nazanin, for your stirring words. To you all gathered here, welcome to our press conference, countering the false narrative propagated by the Islamic Republic. Like most of you, most of Iranian people, I'm greatly relieved and happy that the butcher of Tehran canceled his trip to beautiful Switzerland. However, the Death Committee President, Ebrahim Raisi, his decision comes as no surprise. The reason is plain: fear. Beneath their hollow shows of strength, of this religious righteousness Islamist regime, they are just cowards, spineless cowards. Unlike the brave Iranian youths who fought for freedom. Otherwise, their tally of state murders would not top 600 this year alone, the highest in 8 years. What terrifies them most are we, Iranian people, men and women standing together. Were this not so, they would never have killed Mahsa Amini just for revealing her hair, nor banned her family from accepting the Sakharov Prize. They wouldn't put tens of thousands of innocents into prison. I'm certain that where we Iranian exiles and you, as broadcasters, our voice not there to channel the cries of the Iranian people, the butcher of Tehran, the Death Committee President Raisi would be here in Geneva right now, just to abuse the UN's institutions, to broadcast the regime's nihilistic propaganda, as he did just recently, 3 months ago, at the UN General Assembly in New York. So, that emphasizes the important role of you as press to broadcast the real voice of Iranian people. The clash now unfolding in Iran is one between hope and despair. What future do you wish upon Iran? The dead end of this terrorist regime, this murderous, corrupted regime, or a reborn nation founded on the principles of dignity, human life, and universal freedom? If the answer is so simple, why? Why does the administration of Biden administration professed support for the Iranian people see hollow? Providing sanctions relief pumps money into the regime's coffers. Shaking hands with murderers grants them undeserved legitimacy. We, diaspora women, alongside with victims, have gathered these past days for a single purpose. Very simple one: to counter the state propaganda meant to extinguish all hope among the Iranian people, Iranian public. We seek to redirect global attention from this murderous, corrupted regime to the authentic voice arising from Iran. We aim to expose the mirage of any nuclear agreement. Anyone that they call it negotiation, any number they put on it, with these ayatollahs that might offer sanctions relief to this criminal enterprise. And to make clear that even were Western governments to ransom hostages from Iran by releasing terrorists, recall the infamous prisoner Asadullah Assadi, swapped with Belgium this February. Such craven appeasement would only embolden more hostage-taking while betraying our deepest values, exactly the way Hamas did. They just learned it from their best teacher. Who knows right now the delegation of Islamic Republic are negotiating for what? Pushing Swedish government to swap another terrorist, Hamid Nouri, with Swedish hostage? Or talking again, negotiating over the nuclear deal? In short, we are here to unmask the web of lies spun by this militant theocracy to blind the world to the surging opposition that may soon sweep them into the dustbin of history. Led by Iranian people, Iranian men and women marching arm in arm with all people of conscience. I wish for that day.
Next, we would like to hear from Azadeh Afsahi. She is a well-known psychotherapist that has worked closely with Iranian political prisoners and refugees to help heal their trauma. Azadeh Jan, can you please tell us what you have observed and your reflections?
We have come together today to show the world that Iranian women won't be silenced as long as the brutal regime exists. As it was mentioned, Mr. Raisi's trip to Geneva was cancelled, and that's a good start. But together with the help of the international community, Mr. Raisi and his regime will forever be cancelled. The diversity of the women on this panel is a representation of our unity, symbolizing woman, life, freedom movement that started in Iran by the brave Iranian women. We are here today to honor the lives that was lost and the ones that are continued to fight the freedom of democratic Iran. We want to let the Iranian people inside of Iran know that they are not alone and not forgotten. As the world has gathered in Geneva for the UN Global Refugee Forum, so has the Islamic Republic of Iran, to supposedly advocate for refugees. As a clinician, I have witnessed the impact of various torture inflicted by the regime on the innocent individuals released from prison. These innocent people are faced with rape, sexual assault, torture, mock execution, and death. Justice is a big component of the healing process, especially for the victim of crimes. Once justice is served, they no longer blame themselves and keep the person accountable. However, the victim of the Islamic Republic can't fully recover until this regime is brought to justice. Not only are these victims denied their own justice, but they must watch the same regime spread its propaganda on an international platform, a platform that they do not belong. A sense of belonging is what every refugee truly is longing for, and is denied to many Iranian refugees. The lowest moment of my professional career was when an Iranian refugee in Turkey ended his life by swallowing a cyanide pill over the phone. I will never forget as he was taking his last breath. After his suicide, I had to visit Turkey to see for myself the living condition of the Iranian refugees. I met with Ms. Mahshid Nazemi, Mr. Ali Golilu, Mr. Dariush Omran, and Mr. Sasan Rezai, and as you can see here, Mr. Abbas Dehqan. And the living conditions were inhumane, with no social services such as access to education, healthcare, work permit, insurance, and many, many other things. Officials was assigned a city where they are asked to stay until the asylum case is finalized. This process takes years. Meanwhile, they are living in fear of deportation. And who do you think I blame this? The Islamic Republic of Iran. Being a refugee is not a choice. Collectively, we need to take action and better understand the reason for our inactions, which brings me to the bystander effect, which was coined in 1964 after a young woman was raped and murdered in New York publicly while bystanders witnessed the crime. According to United Nations Developmental Program, a bystander is an observer of violence and other aggressive behavior. Bystanders are individual, but also can be collective agents. Currently, the Islamic Republic is committing daily acts of torture and human rights violations, such as Samira Sabzian, a child bride that is sentenced to be executed, or Tumaj Salohi and Saman Yassin that are in prison for their music. All these crimes are happening while the international community seems at times uncertain or unwillingly to direct confirm the Islamic Republic. We are witnessing bystander effect on a global scale as the Islamic Republic is executing minors, killing, torturing, raping innocent individuals for their fight for freedom, all while the West is watching. You know, every day after each therapy session with the victims of the Islamic Republic, I get asked a simple question. And the question is, why does the UN allow the Islamic Republic to use the international platform to hide its abuses and spread misinformation. So I am here to ask you why. Thank you.
I would now like to turn your attention to one of Iran's brave activists. In fact, we have 3 brave activists and victims of this regime here. And I would like to ask Abbas Dehqan if he could share his personal story and what he feels when he sees his oppressors here in Switzerland. Abbas.
دوستان عزیز، من عباس دهقان هستم و به عنوان روزنامه‌نگار مستقل به اینجا اومدم و متشکرم از دعوت شما. من 5 سال گذشته رو در زندان‌های جمهوری اسلامی محبوس بودم و در 3 نهاد امنیتی اطلاعات سپاه، وزارت اطلاعات و اداره آگاهی معروف به اداره آگاهی شاپور ماه‌ها تحت شکنجه بودم. چند ماهی که پس از تهدید به مرگ و سوء قصد به جان خودم و خانواده‌ام علی‌رغم میلم از ایران خارج و پناهندگی سیاسی گرفتم. اینجا اومدم تا حقیقتی رو با شما از پشت دیوارهای بلند ایران در میون بگذارم. جمهوری اسلامی به شما دروغ گفته، میگوید و خواهد گفت. جمهوری اسلامی رژیم آپارتاید است. جمهوری اسلامی دختران نوجوان را در خیابان برای تارمویی می‌کشد. جمهوری اسلامی اندیشمندان و عارفان ایران را مسموم کرده می‌کشد. هنرمندان، نویسندگان و کنشگران سیاسی را سلاخی می‌کند. جمهوری اسلامی دست به سرکوب دینی می‌زند. بهائیان، درویشان و اهل سنت را در سخت‌ترین شرایط تحت سرکوب قرار می‌دهد. آنها مخالفانشان را نه تنها در ایران که در خاک اروپا هم به راحتی حذف فیزیکی می‌کنند. جمهوری اسلامی توان خود را برای پاکسازی قومیتی و سرکوب بسیاری از اقوام ساکن در ایران به کار می‌گیرد. بلوچستان ایران بیش از 1 سال است که پس از قتل هولناک خدانور و صدها بلوچ دیگر شاهد اعتراض و سرکوبی خونبار است. دوستان عزیز، جمهوری اسلامی نه مأمنی برای پناهجویان است و نه پناهی برای شهروندانش. جمهوری اسلامی پناهجویان افغانستانی را به بدترین شیوه ها حتی در روزهای تلخ جنگ از مرزهایش رد می کند و آنها را از حداقل نیازهای انسانی محروم کرده، حتی ورودشان را به اماکن عمومی ممنوع می کند. بسیاری از کشته شدگان افغانستانی زیر 18 سال بودند که در تیپ موسوم به فاطمیون توسط سپاه پاسداران سازماندهی شده، کودکانی که در ازای حق تحصیل برای خواهر و برادرشان در ایران پذیرفته بودند تا به جنگ بروند. جمهوری اسلامی پناهجویان را از جنگ به جنگ می‌فرستد. روزگار ما در ایران بدل به کمدی تلخی شده. زمانی که در بند بودم، در حالی که شاهد شکنجه بسیاری از بازداشت شدگان در جنبش اعتراضی آبان ماه 98 و پس از آن در جنبش زن زندگی آزادی بودم و نیز شاهد اعدام همبندیان خودم بودم، با خبر شدم ایران صاحب کرسی در سازمان حقوق بشر شده. تراژدی به انتهای خود که میرسد کمدی تلخی میشود. من اینجا آمدم که تأکید کنم هر دستی که مسئولین، نمایندگان، وزرا و رؤسای جمهور منتخب شما با این جنایتکاران میدهد، خنجری میشود بر گلوی زنان و طناب اعدامی میشود بر گردن جوانان ایران. اکنون کشورهای شما بیش از هر زمانی پناهگاه سران جنایتکار ایران و خانواده‌هایشان است. دادخواهی بین المللی بدون ضمانت اجرایی سبب شده که جنایتکاران به راحتی در کشورهای اروپایی گشت و گذار کنند. جمهوری اسلامی موشک نظامی به هواپیمای مسافربری میزند و کشتار علنی غیر نظامیان را بی هیچ مانعی پیش میبرد. اما هر سال در سازمان ملل سخنرانی داشته و مدام مسئولین شما با آنها بر سر میز مذاکره می‌نشینند. جمهوری اسلامی شهروندان اروپایی را هم به گروگان می‌گیرد و در ازای آن باج‌خواهی می‌کند. عزیزان، ما شاهد خشونت‌بارترین سرکوب جنسیتی قرن در ایران توسط جمهوری اسلامی هستیم. سرکوبی خونین که از طرف جامعه مدنی عملاً هیچ هزینه‌ای برای حاکمیت ایران به همراه نداشته و بابت این جنایت‌ها به هیچ نهادی پاسخگو نبوده و همچنان تمام حکومت و رؤسای آن از کرسی‌ها و میزهای مذاکره و امکانات شما محروم نماندند و از نظر حقوقی از هیچ ظرفیت بین‌المللی برای دستگیری و محاکمه مسئولین جنایتکار ایران استفاده نمی‌شود تا دست کم بخشی از عدالت در جایی که نشان از آزادی و برابری به دوش دارد اجرا شود. متشکرم.
I would now like to turn the microphone to Elika Eftekhari, who is an expert in many things, in sanctions, in policy, in geopolitics, and she advises a lot of the Iranian diaspora groups that are part of our coalition. So we would love to hear your reflections, Elika.
Thank you, Nazanin. Thank you, Abbasjan. Give me a moment after Abbas's words. We are here today in honor of Iranian refugees and in recognition of the trauma and struggles they endure. But we would be remiss to appear before you without raising a central issue: gender apartheid. Apartheid standards in international law were designed to address racial apartheid. Today, the components of systemic subjugation that make up apartheid are present in Iran, having substituted gender for race. The situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran is not a simple one of gender discrimination. In Iran, women are banned from many fields of study, from sporting events, and from obtaining a passport and traveling outside the country without their husband's permission. Women's lives and their testimony are worth half of a man in court. Women cannot be judges. Women are forced to wear the compulsory hijab. These bans and the broader systems they belong to seek to establish and maintain women's subjugation vis-a-vis men and the state. Violation of these laws can lead to horrific torture, imprisonment, and death. Gender apartheid, women's rights, human rights, and refugee issues are interwoven when it comes to Iran. A state dedicated to preserving gender apartheid has little appetite left to serve as a safe refuge for outsiders. Iran's endemic humanitarian and refugee crisis is a consequence of a government whose priority is enforcing gender apartheid rather than providing support to refugees. The repressive policies of gender apartheid keep vast swaths of the Iranian regime and the resources of the Iranian people occupied with the subjugation of women. As the regime spent more and more over the years to maintain its repressive system, governance was replaced with corruption. For exposing this truth through his lyrics, Tumaj Sadihi languishes in prison. Instead of waging an open war on women, the Islamic regime has mastered the misuse of governance to its extreme. This mastery of misuse extends to the highest international bodies. The same regime that imposes gender apartheid was once welcomed as the chair of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. A regime that denies health insurance to more than half of its Afghan refugees and tortures its political prisoners is a full-fledged welcome member of the World Health Organization. And although Afghan refugees in Iran are restricted in their movements, are unable to own their own businesses, and do not have a path to citizenship, nevertheless, the regime is here today in Geneva for the Global Refugee Forum. Today, the international legal community increasingly recognizes the distinct status of gender apartheid and supports the evolution of law to keep pace with the crimes of tyrants. By the same token, serious efforts must be made to disengage from the Islamic regime's gamesmanship. International bodies should not serve as a legitimizing platform for oppressive regimes. Racial apartheid in South Africa eventually came to an end, in part because of decades of outside pressure and a severing of diplomatic and economic relations. Today, we are asking for that same degree of international outrage and pressure in honor of Jina Mahsa Amini, in honor of Mohsen Shekari, in honor of child bride Samira Sabzian, who awaits execution at any moment, and in honor of all of the men and women who have come before, between, and after. As a global community, as leaders of nations, the Iranian diaspora calls upon you to be on the front lines of the worldwide campaign to end gender apartheid. A first and important step in this direction is to extend the definition of apartheid to include gender. Collectively, we urge all member states of the United Nations to take a firm stance against gender apartheid and to continue to invest in all of the moral, political, and economic and legal tools available to support the woman life freedom movement. We look forward to an Iran where refugees can thrive without impediments, and where political dissidents write articles in newspapers instead of fleeing the country with visible and hidden wounds. This Iran does exist. It is just beneath the surface, and we all know it. Together, we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elika, for highlighting the importance of the End Gender Apartheid campaign. In fact, all of you can support us in this campaign by going to endgenderapartheid.today, where you can sign our petition and you can learn about how we're trying to expand the definition of apartheid to include not just race, but gender. And then by expanding the definition, we can take this and prosecute those that are responsible for the crime of apartheid in international tribunals. Next, we're going to hear from another of our brave activists from Iran, from Kurdistan, who recently fled when the revolution happened, the Woman Life Freedom Revolution last year. And he has a very powerful and also very difficult story. His name is Zanyar Tondro, and he was shot in both eyes before he spent months as a refugee and then was given asylum. But he's best to tell you his story. Zanyar.
سلام و درود. خیلی خوشحال هستم که اینجا هستم. خیلی ممنون. من زانیار تندرو هستم. یک جوان 18 ساله هستم که با این سن کمم شاهد جنایت‌های بیشمار جمهوری اسلامی هستم در کردستان. من توی کردستان جنایت‌های بیشماری از جمهوری اسلامی دیدم، از کشته شدن دوست 16 ساله خودم به اسم زکریا خیال بگی تا اینکه همین الان که دارم با شما حرف میزنم 8 تا ساچمه فلزی داخل مغز، چشمام و گلوم و خیلی از جاهای دیگه بدنم هست و متاسفانه درستم نمیتونم حرف بزنم به خاطر ساچمه و
از حست و حالت اون وقتی که میبینی سران رژیم، وزیر امور خارجه رژیم، رئیس جمهور به کشور غربی سفر میکنه، از حس و حالت اون لحظه برامون بگو.
خب وقتی که یک قاتل رو شما فرض بکنید که یک نفر رو کشته، قطعا باید جاش توی زندان باشه و وقتی که میبینی آزادانه در هر کشوری که خودشون دوست داشته باشن میرن و ازشون استقبال میشه و فرش قرمز براشون پهن میشه، آدم برای خود من خیلی سخته که این رو درک بکنم که چرا باید به همچین کسایی اصلا حق حرف زدن داده بشه. کسی که دستور شلیک به چشمهای من رو داده، دستور به قتل ژینا رو داده و هزاران هزار نفر دیگه و میلیون ها نفر رو آواره کرده، چرا باید این بشه؟ خیلی اذیت میکنم.
مرسی.
And then the strongest rainbow I've ever seen.
Oh, look, there's Keon again,
Yeah.
bearing
Yes,
witness.
خب کیان پیرفلک، کیان 9 ساله چه گناهی کرد که باید همچین سرنوشتی میداشت؟ یعنی همین کیان پیرفلک برای فهموندن جنایت جمهوری اسلامی کافی است.
Azadik, I forgot to have you translate for Abbas. Could you please first just translate for Zanyar, and then we can translate also Abbas's piece when
Sure. So Zanyar was a victim of the Islamic Republic. He was shot in both of his eyes. Unfortunately, he has lost one of them and can't no longer see. He has 8 bullets, or the pellet, I think, the pellet still in his body. One of it is still in his throat, so it makes it very difficult for him to be able to speak. He also witnessed his best friend, 16-year-old Zakaria Khair, that died. Also, he is a refugee now in Germany. And what makes him so devastated is to see that the regime hasn't been brought to justice. Not only has the regime hasn't been brought to justice, but the West and United Nations, they are welcoming the regime with the red carpet of inviting him and shaking their hands and sitting and negotiating. To him, that's the blow to his face, because he doesn't think that they are dignity of even having a conversation. So it is extremely hard for him to swallow this phenomenon that is happening right now in the society, that we are welcoming the Islamic Republic.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you for that translation. Would you like to translate now for Abbas or afterwards?
We can translate
Yes.
now, because I think obviously Abbas John, thank you so much. مرسی که اومدین اینجا I know Abbas because when I went to Turkey, I had the privilege to meet him and his beautiful family. They were nothing but welcoming to me. Abbas is a journalist, and unfortunately he was in prison for 5 years. While he was in prison, his daughter was born, and he was deprived of visiting his daughter at the hospital, seeing her grow up. And during this 5 years, he endured a tremendous amount of torture, and his release was a surprise. I know he didn't discuss this, but his family thought that he's going to be behind bars forever. He had to make the difficult decision that a lot of refugees in Turkey are doing, is to leave Iran behind and seek a place that they can live freely. He migrated to Turkey, and after a few months now he is in Europe with his family. He talked about the brutal regime, what the regime is doing, killing innocent children, killing young girls for a strand of hair, how inhumane the regime is towards the Afghanis, for the refugees in Iran, and how the regime's brutality doesn't have no limit. The same thing that they did of shooting down the Ukrainian flight of 279 innocent people died. And he is also surprised that the UN and the Western international community is still negotiating. He remembered it very vividly when he was behind bars and he was hearing the announcement that United Nations assigned Islamic Republic as a chair of Social Forum and Technology. He could not believe that a regime that is torturing, killing, executing its own people could hold such title. So he is here today among us to ask the international community to stop negotiating with the Islamic Republic, to stop shaking their hands, because he and his family is a living victim of what the Islamic Republic is capable of.
Excellent translation, Azadeh. Thank you. And if you don't mind translating for one more victim of this brutal regime, we are now going to hear from Puriya Ebrahimi.
از من خواسته شده که شرحی از اتفاقایی که داخل ایران برای من افتاده اینجا بازگو کنم. اما دلیل این که اون اتفاقها توی میتونم بگم 10-12 سال آخری که در ایران بودم برای من مستمر انجام میشد و اون بازداشت هایی که انجام شد منو مجاب میکنه که بپردازم به حرف و دردی که شاید همه ماها به خاطر اون امروز اینجا جمع شدیم. متن کوتاهی رو نوشتم که فکر میکنم تمام این سالها و صحبتها رو در خودش جا بده. من در ایران به واسطه فعالیت‌های خبری که بازگو کننده نقض فاحش حقوق بشر از جانب حکومت اسلامی بود بارها مورد بازداشت، شکنجه و آزار قرار گرفتم. در کلام کلی فعالیت من تحت پوشش بخش کوچکی از گزارشات نقض حقوق بشر در ایران به صورت مستند به افراد فعال و مرتبط با سازمان‌ها و نهادهای حقوق بشری بود. فعالیتی که حتی در قانون اساسی حکومت اسلامی مجاز تعریف شده بود. فعالیتی که من بارها و سالها به زندان و تحت بازجویی و شکنجه روحی و روانی بودم تا از نزدیک با رفتار این حکومت آشنا شوم. امروز روی صحبتم با تمام کسانی که حرفهای مرا میشنوند درک میکنند و توان همدردی با انسانها را در خود میبینند، با نهادها و سازمانها و دولتهایی که مدعی به رفتار حقوق بشر هستند. این است که برای یک بار کلام مردم ایران را بشنوند و ببینند که زندانهای این سیستم جنایتکار پر شده است از هنرمند و فریخته و معلم و نخبه. اتاقهای بازجویی به خون مردم بیگناه سنگفر شده است که انسانیت را رعایت کردند و تنها جرمشان انسانیت بود. هنرمندانی که با مردم همدردی کردند تحت شکنجه قرار می‌گیرند. نام توماج صالحی شاید به گوش شما رسیده باشد. شخصیت‌های برجسته‌ای که سالهاست از درد مردم سخن گفتند و درد زندان و دوری فرزندان را به جان خریدند. نام نرگس محمدی ها، گلرخ ایریایی ها را شنیده اید آیا؟ خون مردمان و جوانانی که با همدلی انسانگونه صحبت از انسانیت و شرافت و آزادی کردن سنگفرش خیابان‌های ایران را قرمز کرده است. ژینا امینی، مجید رضا رهنورد و هزاران نفر که توسط این حکومت تروریست کشته شدند تا به دنیا پیام مردم ایران را بدهند. پیامی واضح که تمام مردم ایران را در خود جای دارد. پیامی که بارها در چند سال گذشته بازگو شده است. حرفی که دیگر نمیتواند تحت سیاست‌های دولت‌ها نادیده گرفته شود. در این 2 سال گذشته هزاران نفر از مردم بارها در کشورهای اروپا به هم پیوستند تا در مورد حقیقت وحشتناکی که می‌دانند به جهانیان هشدار دهند. حقیقتی با نام سپاه پاسداران حکومت اسلامی که پیکره اصلی این سیستم فاسد است و آنچه که در جهان با نام تروریست‌های تندرو اسلامی باعث جنایت بشری شدند همه زایده این ارگان و علی خامنه‌ای توسط سپاه پاسداران خود متاسفانه برای تمام دنیا امروز قد علم کرده است. اما صحبت من در جان مطلب. مطالبات مردم ایران از تمام آنچه که شاید همه شما را در این چند سال کنجکاو کرده است گذشته. مردم ایران از حجاب و آزادی و تمام حواشی که سیاست‌های حکومت اسلامی بنا کرده است فراتر سخن می‌گویند. مردم ایران از دادخواهی خون‌های بر زمین ریخته شده به فریاد آمدند. مردم ایران از شکنجه و تجاوز و قتل‌های حکومتی به پا خواستند. دادخواه زیباترین فرزندانشان هستند. انقلاب تعریف فرهنگی است که امروز در دل همه ایران جا گرفته. من به عنوان یک انسان، یک صدا از بین میلیون‌ها انسان، از تمام سازمان‌ها، نهادها و افراد مربوط در روابط می‌خواهم دست از مماشات با جنایتکار بردارند و برای اولین بار در طرف درست تاریخ بایستند. دیکتاتوری علی خامنه‌ای و حکومت اسلامی محکوم به نابودی است و حافظه تاریخ همه کسانی را که در کنار این جانی ایستادند را فراموش نخواهد کرد و تاریخ با احترام و درود به تمام وجدان‌های بیدار و دل‌های همراه سخن خواهد گفت. ممنون.
So we have another reporter that has been imprisoned many times in Iran by the Islamic Republic, and he has been tortured, physically and mentally, and finally he had to escape and to seek refuge in Europe. What Puria was saying, basically I'm trying to wrap it in a way because it's impossible the way that he was expressing himself in a poetic way for me to be able to translate. By basically what he was saying, that Iranian parents are burying their children, and this should be a wake-up call for the communities, for all the human rights communities, international human rights communities, that this is not a norm. But unfortunately for the Iranian people right now, it is a norm for them to bury their kids. Journalism is not a crime. Music is not a crime. Having religion freedom is not a crime. But under Islamic Republic, all these things are considered a crime and punishable by death. He wants the international community to stand on the right side of history by standing behind the Iranian people that are fighting for their freedom. he couldn't keep silence when he was in Iran. That was one of the many reasons that he had to endure so much torture. Now that he is outside of Iran, he is dedicated to use his voice for the people of inside of Iran. Thank you.
Bravo. Last but certainly not least, Sara Sayed. You may have seen her on the show Young Wallander, but she is also an international human rights lawyer that will offer us some parting words before our question and answer.
Thank you, Nazanin. Thank you to everyone. It's been so inspiring. I just hope to do justice in conclusion. In the hearts of Iranian diaspora, a fervent love for our homeland propels a deep desire to contribute to not only Iran's prosperity, but also the world's future. And this is Iran's future. Many of us representing the silent aspirations of our compatriots inside the country who, due to fear of persecution, cannot express their yearning for freedom, embarked on a journey to see Iran liberated. And as grim as that may seem, we are amongst the lucky ones. For most people, adulthood in Iran comes as a sobering reminder that they live in a country in which justice is perpetually unbalanced against their gender, their ethnicity, and the God they worship. A place where aspirations are silenced by gender apartheid, as my dear friend Elika mentioned. It is a country where you're considered a Muslim with obligations rather than a citizen with rights. A country ruled by a government where even the act of giving this very talk could cost us our lives. Yet in this same nation, in this very same nation, the force of the Iranian people has been transformed into a powerful weapon, a beacon of resistance, a revolution we call woman, life, freedom, and it extends far beyond the borders of Iran. What on the surface looked like a protest against compulsory hijab and bodily autonomy in the woman, life, freedom movement was an outcry against 4 decades of institutionalized oppression of justice, economic hardship, and systematic violations of human rights. And it succeeded, and it persists, and it shall remain in existence till it succeeds on the very day of freedom because of its inclusivity. Forging a remarkably inclusive movement, Iranians not only bridged divides between men and women, but also built alliances with ethnic minorities, religious, LGBTQ+, and the powerful international community and the Iranian diaspora outside the country. They have given us hope. Their grassroots engagement, building a powerful and adaptable and progressive platform, utilizing social media and citizen journalism to balance the divide between individual responsibility and collective action. Non-violent civil disobedience at its best, because it's both symbolic and strategic. And this remarkable inclusivity has forged an unmatched unity amongst people within and beyond Iran, and it's time for the international community to pay attention. Because it is not only a fight for the equality of women, it is a fight for our Baha'i brothers and sisters who are deprived of university education, denied proper burial of their deceased family members. It is a fight for tens and thousands of Iranians, Jews, Christian converts, and atheists who have faced imprisonment, execution, and confiscation of their property. It is a fight for every Sunni Muslim who believes in the freedom of choice, because how can you for fact infer someone's a true believer if they have no choice in choosing otherwise? It is a fight for a diaspora of displaced refugees who should be making Iran proud today. And yet, they will forever, until the day of freedom, long for a home. This is a fight for freedom of expression, for journalists to be able to write and work from home instead of prisons, for rappers to receive awards rather than jail sentences, for teachers to be able to teach the truth instead of being forced to disseminate propaganda. It is a fight to build schools in Iran, not to destroy them in Syria. It is a fight to end funding and training for extremism of Hamas and Hezbollah, and forge a new chapter for regional peace for Iran and for the world. It is a fight to end the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It is for our Afghanistani brothers and sisters who denied citizenship, property, and financial rights, even if they're born in Iran. It is a battle against child labor amid severe poverty crisis affecting 15% of the Iranian child population, who are forced to work in dangerous and unsanitary circumstances, deprived of essential educational opportunities. This is to save Samira Sabzian, who faces death penalty for fighting to break the chains of her childhood marriage. It is a fight for the disillusioned and disenfranchised ethnic enclaves, religious minorities, and the LGBTQ+ community who are systematically targeted by the regime. And so here we are, all of us, here to tell you that this is not just a revolution in Iran. Iranians are not just fighting against a dictatorship, they're rising against an entire coalition of autocratic and oppressive regimes. Iranians have circumvented every oppressive measure and continue to expose the regime propaganda. They have converted social media into a collective action tool, encouraging and disseminating citizen journalism and emboldening a nation of ordinary people who in their very protests, arrests, detentions, and resilient spirit educate the world. With one hashtag, 2 words, Mahsa Amini, over 400 million times just so we could hear them. And still, the regime's access to international forums drowns out the voices of the Iranians inside Iran. The regime has long shielded itself from accountability on the global stage. For over 4 decades, Islamic Republic authorities have routinely denied, distorted, and outright dismissed overwhelming evidence of gross human rights violations that occur in Iran, instead going on the offensive against critics with false counter-accusations intended to divert and derail urgent discussions as at United Nations, as Nazanin Jan put. The hashtag Women Life Freedom movement, the hashtag Women Life Freedom has a full syllabus, and I'm so proud to say this, on civil disobedience. Everyone should click on it. It helps us and the world remember. It compels us to reject numbness as a form of healing and remain vigilant against manipulative tactics of those who suppress the truth. You see, dictators, they rely on our forgetfulness to maintain control. But the hashtag We Will Not Forgive and We Will Not Forget not only resonates deeply in the collective memory, but it is an archive of stories that keep our heroes alive and the public vigilant, because this is a fight for those beating hearts who want it to be more than just a hashtag. And yet the regime misuses the UN Global Forums to delegitimize human rights values. But the regime doesn't always win, and as a result of global advocacy, Islamic Republic of Iran was the first country to be voted out of the UN Commission on Status of Women. However, Iranians need consistency at the United Nations and other global bodies, as we witness young Iranians continually defy the authority of a broken system, refusing to wear hijab even though the consequences could potentially change the entirety of their lives, in the face of mounting evidence of sexual violence against political male and female detainees, ongoing executions, including that of children, systematic violations of ethnic and minority rights. Iran is appointed to chair the 2023 Social Forum. Isn't that a shame? at a time when forms are broken. Institutions do not make sense and governments lead with violence. Iranian men and women have modeled and advanced what it looks like when we rise to the best of our humanity. Womanhood in Iran has given life to the most progressive, inclusive, unifying, evolutionary level revolution of freedom that transcends borders and boundaries. It's a renaissance the world should listen to. Susan Sontag says, at the center of our moral life, our moral imagination, are great models of resistance, the great stories of those who have said no. No, I will not serve. The action of those heroic resistances will not topple a power hell-bent on repression. It simply declares enough. So isn't it time for the United Nations, the international community, world leaders to find their enough, to find their no against the Islamic Republic regime?
Beautifully put, Sara. Thank you for the hopeful outlook, but also the poignant questions that we must ask from the international community. Please check out Sara Sayed's TEDx talk, where she offers even more there, and an upcoming documentary on women's rights. This concludes our press conference. Our team will be meeting with heads of missions and other individuals in Geneva in the next couple of days. We remind you to list the IRGC on your terrorist lists for their crimes against humanity, and we plead with you to not shake the blood-soaked hands of this regime. Not only for Iranians, but also for your own nation. Remember, by legitimizing a tyranny, you consequently delegitimize your own liberty. Think twice. Merci et bon après-midi.